Hey, welcome to another episode of GeekOutdoors.com. And if you've watched my channel, you know that this year I had bought the LG G5 as my new flagship phone. And before that, I had the original HTC One phone from about 4 years ago. And one of the big things that I wanted in my new phone, and that I really wish that I would have done even with the HTC One, was I wanted micro SD card expansion. I wanted expandable storage. And as much as I love the HTC One, one of the biggest things that just drove me insane was the fact that it didn't have expandable storage. And when the HTC One originally came out, that was something that was uncommon in the Android world, because most Android phones at that time, they all came with the micro SD card slot expansion. And that made a lot of sense. But here recently, Android phones, a lot of the flagship ones, starting really in I would say 2014 to 2015, they started not including micro SD card expansion. The biggest one being the Samsung Galaxy S6 last year when it came out, and a lot of people were not happy with that. So when I heard that the LG G5 was still going to have micro SD card expansion, I was really happy. And nowadays it makes even more sense for you to have expandable storage. And with the LG G5, the expansion was even more than I had hoped, because this one can actually theoretically hold up to a 2 terabyte card. So that is immense. And so that gets me into the whole discussion of, why do phones in 2016 beyond, why do they not have micro SD cards? Because they are super cheap and they are extremely fast now. Internal storage is still going to be faster, but if you're looking at these pro versions, I have a class 10 micro SD card in mine and it's plenty fast, but if you have the pro versions, they are super fast. I mean, they're almost as fast as internal storage. So, and in some cases, they are faster than internal storage depending on the type of storage quality that they're using on their phones. So, which leads me to the two phones that I wanted to talk about, or the two groups of phone that do not have micro SD card expansion in 2016. Now, the first one is, one that everybody knows, is the iPhone. The iPhone has never had any type of, like memory expansion. And I think that their future iPhones, they might have to. Okay, and here's my reasoning. Okay, now if you remember the current iPhone 6 and 6S, their base model is 16 gigs. And that's absolutely laughable. Okay, 16 gigs, and if you consider the OS is on there as well, you're probably going to have around 14 gigs left over. And nowadays, when you're shooting videos in 1080p and especially in 4K, 16 gigs is nothing. And then your video games themselves, they're like a gig or more if you're looking at the real high-end games. And so, that's just doesn't cut it anymore. And one of the experiences that I had with HTC One is I constantly had to go delete stuff so I could make more room for other things, and I shoot a lot of videos and I do like playing some high-end games, but man, it just wasn't enough. And you got to remember the HTC One had 32 gigs and I was having trouble. Okay, so that one, I just do not know how iPhone users, I still don't understand, how they're able to only have 16 gigs. If I had that much trouble with a 32 gig phone with the HTC One, I'm not sure how you can deal with 16 gigs. And then, with the release of the iPhone 7 and then going forward, they said the base is going to have 32 gigs, but it's still not enough, especially when everything's moving towards 4K, VR, more higher quality videos. More games are going to get bigger, and so that means they're going to require a lot more storage. Okay, so with Apple, I think in the future they are going to offer some type of expandable storage, and more than likely it might be proprietary to Apple, because I just don't see how they could maintain this type of storage for the long term when everything's getting so much larger. Okay, now Apple isn't the only one that's guilty of this. Google themselves is extremely guilty of this, and they, with their Google Nexus line of phones, they've never had any micro SD card expansion ever since the beginning of the Nexus line. If I'm not mistaken, I don't think they've ever had micro SD card expansion. And their reasonings are probably very similar to what Apple's reasonings are, but there's other reasons behind that as well. So Google's reasoning is that they don't have micro SD card expansion because, number one, it's a security issue. When you have external storage, you could have potential security flaws, and so that's one thing. Another thing is they're claiming is that the speed of the actual micro SD card is not going to be as fast as the internal storage, okay? And finally, they also tout that, it might cause some confusion for consumers having a micro SD card slot. And with all three of those things, that's just simply not the case anymore. Okay, now with security, okay, I'm going to talk about that in depth a little bit after this, okay? But I really do not worry about security with my micro SD card slot, and I can't remember any time that there's been a huge security issue with any micro SD card on any of these Google or these Android phones, unless you purposely or incidentally downloaded things that would cause problems, okay? But I've not heard of any mainstream or large scale security problems or hacks with micro SD card slots, okay? Because there are a lot of Android phones that still have expandable storage. So that's one thing. The next thing is the speed, and as I mentioned a little bit earlier, the new micro SD card slots, the fast ones, they are extremely fast, okay? Some of them have over like 300 meg read and I think over 100 meg write speeds, if I'm not mistaken. It's either one. It's really fast. They have some really fast micro SD card slots. So that is out of the way as well, as in terms of why they don't have it. And then finally, the whole issue of, it might cause confusion. I'm sorry, I don't think anybody's ever going to get confused over adding additional storage. People have been doing it for years with devices, with cameras, way before they had these smartphones. And we've had expandable storage, SD card slots, micro SD card slots on laptops and many other devices, including cameras and video cameras as well. And so that's really a moot point. Now, I want to talk about security, okay? Now, Google kind of does have a point there, but ever since Android Marshmallow, they have adaptable storage, which does have 128-bit AES encryption, which does make it more secure. However, there are some drawbacks with using adaptable storage. And what adaptable storage is whenever you put in a micro SD card and you make it part of the adaptable storage, it actually makes it like the internal storage. It makes it part of the internal storage of the phone. And so it also adds that encryption that I talked about earlier. So what that does is it treats the SD card, the expansion, the micro SD card, just as one singular partition of storage. Now, I just don't see the benefits of that besides having the security, because whenever you do adopt this type of storage, you cannot reuse your micro SD card slot in another phone. You just can't take it out, swap it, and put in another phone. Because of the nature that it works with the partitions, if you were to take that micro SD card slot and you had apps or something, other programs or files in there, you're gonna have problems with your phone. Okay, so not a really good way of using that. Okay, so now in 2016, or maybe even 2017, that's probably when they might do it. I hope that Google does adopt expandable storage, because like I said a little bit earlier, with all the large file sizes that we're getting for videos and games and other types of media, it just does not make sense anymore not to have expandable storage. So I think the Google Nexus line, or whatever they call it in the future, the Google phones, they're going to have it because they're going to have to. And then also Apple might also have to do it as well, because they need more storage. And the whole idea of this whole online storage At this point, it is not viable. Okay, I mean, because you're going to need a really fast internet connection, and you got to remember, there's so many other countries around the world that have really poor internet connections, and so I don't think that is a viable thing, and I definitely do not want to depend on an internet connection or the cloud to access my files. So that is basically it for my micro SD card slot rant, I would say. I hope that both Apple and Google, they kind of, kind of see where things are going. I know they do, and they do like add expandable storage. And, at the end of the day, I really think that, and a lot of people probably agree with this, it's all about the money. I mean, it doesn't take much to add expandable storage. I mean, it's just a tray on there, and you're going to put your SIM card in there anyway. Like my LG G5, the SIM card tray actually has a micro SD card slot placed right there as well. So it's not a difficult thing to do, but they make so much more money when they're selling phones with different storage options. And so, yeah, that's a whole nother different type of rant altogether. So let me know what your thoughts are on, storage capacity, storage expansion, micro SD card slots, whether they're on an iPhone, Google Nexus, or any other type of phones that you can think of. So leave your comments and ideas below, and remember, I am on Snapchat at Geek Outdoors. Thanks for watching. Thanks for checking out this episode. And as always, if you like these videos, be sure to click on the subscribe button. And for full written content, audio content, and additional geek stuff, head over to geekoutdoors.com, and I'll see you outdoors on the very next episode.